A, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules on bullying and harassment?
The rules around bullying and harassment are quite specific, and if the context in which that language is used amounts to bullying and harassment, then we take action against it.
Can you say yes to that question of does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules on bullying and harassment?
Calling for the genocide of Jews is anti-Semitic.
So yes.
And that is anti-Semitic speech. And as I've said,
and it's a yes.
When speech crosses into conduct.
And it's a yes. I've asked the witnesses.
When speech crosses into conduct, we take action.
So is that a yes? Is that a yes? The witness hasn't answered. Madam Chair, is that a yes? You cannot answer the question.
Crosses into conduct.
I'm sorry.
We take action.
I'm sorry, Dr. Gay. I have to cut you off.
Of course.
That was Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. She was at the House Committee on Education and Workforce, where they held an important committee hearing on holding campus leaders accountable and confronting anti-Semitism. To get reaction on this and an update on what is happening in the war in Israel, my dear friend, Julie Strauss-Levin, thank you for joining me on CPAC Now, America Uncanceled.
Thank you, Mercy. As usual, it's a pleasure to be here, not because of the subject matter, but because of you.
Oh, well, let me tell you, I mean, you were watching this committee hearing yesterday in the House of Representatives. I was, I guess I can't say I was shocked, because I think that you're watching this double standard between what these Ivy League presidents say and saying, well, this is freedom of speech, this idea of the massacre of Jews, the genocide of Jews. Yet, when it comes to conservatives, they'll censor them, they'll silence them. They allow for the violent rhetoric. Why this anti-Semitism that we're seeing in our academic institutions?
So I would say several things. First of all, I find it humorous that these institutions are called elite. How are they elite? If you look up the definition of elite, if you will, they're not elite. They're cesspools for Marxist thinking, the same individuals, the same universities that hate Israel, hate America. It's a synonymous, interchangeable terminology, if you will. And so to me, it's not a shock. It's appalling. And I know Elise Stefanik was almost brought to tears,
right?
When she was incredulous, and so it was like one questioner after another, and Democrats as well. I must give credit. There were Democrats on that committee that asked some very tough questions, but the reaction from those who were asking the questions was they seemed shocked.
Yeah.
The answers didn't shock me in the slightest, because we know that this is where the hatred is born and has been. This is the petri dish for anti-Semitism, which I, as you know, call Jew hatred, and hatred of America. So when you have a congresswoman so incredulously asking them, are you telling me calling for the genocide of the Jewish people is okay unless it actually turns into action? So in other words, you have to be killed,
right? You
have to have physical violence, and then all of a sudden it moves from the First Amendment to actionable activity is so appalling.
And it feels, Julie, that the Jewish students really don't feel safe. I mean, remember, Democrats always talk about, oh, when Donald Trump was elected, we'll have a safe space for you, for these students and the teachers. But then when it comes to the Jewish students, they're actually openly talking about how they feel harassed, how they feel bullied, how they feel that their lives are in danger. We saw, obviously, the one person who threatened to kill Jews in Columbia University. I mean, what is it going to take? Are we going to see, an uprising in this violence against the Jewish students in our universities?
So I do think there will be violence, and I do think someone's going to get hurt. The question is, what's going to be done? What's the response going to be? Every college and university has codes of conduct. And Congresswoman Stefanik basically said, does this not violate your code of conduct? And they refuse to answer. But it's not just that. There are state laws. I know in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I personally have researched them for the Youngkin administration. There are state laws that are available. Title VI of the federal law, the Department of Education can certainly enforce these laws.
Yeah.
There has to be a willingness to take action. Nothing will happen unless and until these three women in particular, and a whole host of college, universities, and presidents, college and university presidents get fired.
Yeah.
And that's only going to happen if people speak up and speak out. And it's all about the money.
Yes.
And when I say it's all about the money, it's not just cutting off federal funding. I mean, we're helping to pay for this, as was pointed out by several members of the committee yesterday. But in addition to that, there's state funding that goes to them. There's donors that pay a lot of money to support these universities. They must stop.
So I got to ask you, because we know, for example, there was one professor at one of these universities, an Arab professor, who basically was not sanctioned. And he, in the class, said he told Jews to go back and to basically to effing go back to Berlin. And he praised the Intifada revolution. So there's freedom of speech. And then there's a professor who won't even get sanctioned for basically making what I think, again, violent comments.
You're 100% correct. And I think if there was a bit of a deep dive, you will find that there are multiple professors on multiple college campuses and university campuses who speak the same way. He just happened to be the one who was called out. You're right. He said, go back to Berlin, go back to Moscow. But when you have leadership that permits this activity, and I can tell you I was on the Commission to Combat Antisemitism, which was created by Governor Youngkin, and we did a lot of work in this area of anti-Semitism. And there are studies that are out there that show a direct correlation between campuses that have DEI offices, DEI meaning diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and officers, that there is a link between those institutions that have those individuals and offices, and an increase in anti-Semitism. So if you're other minorities, you're protected. If you're a Jew, those offices ignore you. So there's no one to go to. I mean, I think, I don't know whether I heard it yesterday at the press conference of the four extremely articulate young people said that they reached out to the DEI office. You know, there's so much, after a while it conflates which student said what. But I recall hearing, I believe it was yesterday, a student saying the DEI office doesn't even care. Like, where do we go? These are young people who, by the way, some of them, not just the four yesterday, but other students were sitting in that committee hearing, listening to the college and university presidents say what they said while these students are sitting there. Imagine having, this is the United States of America.
Right.
How can this be?
Well, and the students, I got to tell you, they were so incredibly brave. I saw some of their commentary afterwards, and them talking about how this is, as they said, it's not just harassment. It literally is, our lives are on the line when they're talking about the massacre of Jews, these other students that are pro-Hamas sympathizers. But it's been interesting. We've seen the University of Pennsylvania. They were sued by a pair of students that claimed that the campus was a hotbed of anti-Semitism, even before Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. So different universities are getting sued by these students. What is your sense? Will these cases go anywhere, do you think?
I think it depends where the lawsuits were filed, right? I mean, we see what's happened with President Trump, right? Depends where you are. And there, unfortunately, there's many judges who are ideologically driven as opposed to being driven by the law. And for them, justice is not blind. So it's difficult to answer that question because, one, it depends the forum and venue, and two, it also depends on the laws, that the basis for the lawsuit. And so, for example, you know, if students are looking towards the Department of Education to do anything, sure, they've finally, you know, filed filed a couple of investigations and actions against universities. But, how old are we? What year are we in? This can drag on for a very, very long time.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came out basically saying that we need massive military force. It's going to be the fastest way to end the war. It says, quote, if our friends want to help shorten the war, which is also their war against the barbarism that threatens to sweep the world, they simply have to stand firm by our side. Obviously there's been this push by the Biden administration and others for extending the ceasefire. We still know that they are estimating about 138 hostages still held in captivity by these Hamas barbaric terrorists that have raped. I mean, the more of these stories that come out, raped and killed women, killed babies, killed the elderly. It's just been so tragic to listen to these stories. What's your sense on where the Biden administration, how they've handled it thus far in terms of following these attacks, and now with Netanyahu making a very strong statement, look, we got to use massive military force if you want to see a shortened war?
Well, I would say this. First of all, Israel is blessed, the United States is blessed, and those who believe in liberty and peace are blessed that Benjamin Netanyahu is in office, because he has the strength and the fight and understands what's at stake here. So thank goodness he's here. The bad news is the Biden administration hates Israel and they hate Jews, and it's a complete layover, if you will, of the Obama administration. You've got Blinken, you've got Sullivan, you've got the entire coterie of those who detest Israel. We know that Obama detests Netanyahu, and the reason he detests him is because Netanyahu wants to take care of his people. So you have to understand, you've got the force of good and the force of freedom and the force of liberty and the force of peace versus what we have going on in the United States with this administration that does not want to see an Israel. They empathize and want an Iran. So to answer your question, Netanyahu, look, I'm not a military expert, but he surrounds himself with people, and I do think they need to continue the fight. We see what happened with Hamas. Hamas is the one that broke the ceasefire, and no more ceasefires, in my opinion. They need to go in. They need to do what they have to do.
Let me ask you this, because you talked about the White House, and I do agree. I think more and more we're seeing dissent within the White House where they're protesting Biden and the administration, basically in the sense of being so pro-Hamas. So it is creating, I think, such a weakening between the Biden administration and the fact that there are people inside that are obviously not pro-Israel in any way. What else are you hearing in terms of that? Is it just like this complete tension within the administration on how to move forward on this? Is it why you're seeing them just crumble every time they have to tackle this issue?
It's my understanding that Obama doesn't actually think, I read an article that Obama does not think that Biden is doing enough and putting enough pressure on Israel in a way that's very, very injurious to Israel and therefore very injurious to the United States. But remember who Obama is and what he's made of. And there's always been this tension between Obama and Biden, because Biden always felt that Obama never listened to him. When Biden was Veep, it's a little bit of a drama. And now he wants to do his thing. But the tension, in my mind, to which you're referring is those who think that Biden's not being harsh enough toward Israel. I think he's being pretty darn harsh. And I think this duplicity of behaving one way in front of the camera and then behind the camera or behind the scenes having Blinken et al. Pressure Israel is really disgusting. They should come out and at least be honest with the American people. Thank goodness, I think Americans are too smart for it.
Well, I want to ask you, because you had this great link that we'll make sure to put up on tonight's show about the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, and really understanding how prepared they've had to be, the IDF have had to be, because they've been in so many multiple military operations. Walk us through what you learned when you were going through this in terms of just what's happening with the IDF, why they have had to continuously face these threats since the inception of the State of Israel.
So there have been wars since the day that Israel's independence was acknowledged. So the vote was in 1947 December, and the war of independence, how it was now known, it was in May 1948, where Israel was attacked by 6 Arab states. Mm-hmm. And there was, I'll go through it quickly because it could be an entire tutorial,
yes.
But there was a war in 48, 56, 67, 72 was an operation, meaning it was the IDF had to go in and react to a raid. There was an airline that they had to save the Israeli people on. Then 73, then there was another rescue at Entebbe, which was another hijacking, and on and on. So there was an operation in 1978 where PLO terrorists infiltrated and took a bus in northern Israel and killed numerous Israelis. I can go on and on, but I will just put it this way, that in every single decade, there have been multiple either wars or what's known as an intifada, or operations in which Israel had to react to these kinds of heinous, aggressive actions.
I want to jump into our last question here because we had talked about this earlier, but the media, really, the propaganda that's coming from the American leftist media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, talk about appalling. It's almost as appalling as those college presidents. They won't even basically share the difference between or explain the difference between the PLO and Hamas. Walk us through in understanding when the Biden administration pushes this two-state solution and the media is pushing this two-state solution, walk us through why we have to understand the mentality of the Palestinians in terms of what you learned in terms of the polls.
So there is this attempt by the administration and therefore by the media, which are one and the same, to distinguish between the Palestinian people and the quote civilians versus Hamas, being the terrorist organization that perpetrated the attack on October 7. And they create this very false narrative that the former are sort of peace-loving or at least not aggressive, and therefore when this war eventually ends, there should be this two-state solution where Gaza and what they call the West Bank, which is really part of the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, and is known in the Hebrew Bible and for 4,000 years as Judea and Samaria, essentially, where other Palestinians live. So the administration's saying, no, those guys are the good guys, the peaceful guys. You're good getting rid of Hamas. Here are the facts, and I think this is really important for people to listen to, and that's why coming and speaking to you at CPAC and listening to what you have to say is so crucial, because CPAC provides very, very key information. So the organization Arab World for Research and Development conducted a poll, hardly a Jewish organization, right? And their question was, what is your feeling about what happened on October 7th? What do you think, in essence, should happen when this war ends? 75% of Palestinians, so we're not talking Hamas terrorists, we're talking about supposedly the good guys, the civilians, right? Yeah. 75% of them support what happened on October 7th.
75%.
75%. Yeah. So 3/4 of Palestinians support what happened on October 7th. 86% reject having any coexistence with the Jews and Arabs.
Yeah. Wow.
Almost 75% support the creation of a Palestinian state that goes from the river to the sea. And as we know, the end of that is from the river to the sea. We will be free of Jews. That's basically the rhetoric.
Yeah.
And here's a very interesting statistic. The Palestinians who live in Judea and Samaria, remember, this is the area that's controlled by Abbas, where Fatah is, and various other, the brigade, the Palestinian Jihad. 83% of them support what happened on October 7th versus 63% of those, quote, civilians who live in Gaza. So supposedly the good guys in Judea and Samaria even more concur and agree and support and go what happened on October 7th. So these are not peace-loving people. These are not people who should be given any touch, much less a presence or control in Gaza. They all have to be defeated, and it's going to be a very, very difficult task. And I think Netanyahu is the only one who can get it done.
Yeah, and we need good, strong Republican leadership on our end, because the Democrats, now some of them have been pro-Israel, but you're definitely seeing this weakened faction happening within the Democrat Party, where I just see it's very divided. Julie Strauss-Levin, thank you so much for joining me.
Very welcome.
On America Uncanceled. These updates are critical. We'll make sure that both of us keep you informed to our viewers here on what's happening in Israel, how it's impacting the politics here in the United States, and being able to, make that fight, to talk about with the facts to people around you in your community, so that they can understand the real risk, which is that not only for the battle of the heart of Israel in the United States, but the battle for the heart of Western civilization. Julie, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much. Be well.
And thank you all for joining me. And remember, you can always catch us on your podcast, wherever you get a podcast. And also stay with us. Make sure that you get your tickets for CPAC coming February 21st through the 24th. Go to cpac.org for your special price on these tickets. It's a great Christmas gift as well. Thank you, and God bless.